over the years, we've seen that more funding usually goes to climate mitigation efforts. So meaning that climate adaptation is lagging in terms of funding. Why is it the case?
That is very a needed question that we need to look into this aspect, because end of the day, it is the finance, the budget, the money that makes all the difference. As I quoted earlier, the adaptation gap report by the UNEP, it clearly estimates that uh, compare to the mitigation efforts financially, the adaptation are much behind. The estimates required states, uh, if you see adaptation gap report 2023 and 2025, it started from 215 billion by 2030. Now the estimates showing much more increased number to 365 billion here, approximate ranges, which is a clear indication that we require the money. Now the valid question is why there is an imbalance. Again, as I pointed earlier in my conversation, the mitigation generate revenue. For example, the renewable energy project generate financial returns. You're an energy expert. When you make a plan, it addresses mitigation, but in turn, it gives you a financial return. Whereas adaptation project often produce only the public goods, flood protection. It will not give you in return in terms of money. It gives its return in different other form, like it saves the life, it protects the environment. So that could be one of the reasons why there is an imbalance. When the private sector wants to invest the money, they always wants to know what is the return. So adaptation in this case, we cannot reap it immediately, that too in the form of money. Two, the measurement challenges. Mitigation, comparatively, it is easier to measure the tons of carbon dioxide that has been reduced. That is one example. Whereas in adaptation, the outcomes are harder to quantify. Yes, the COP30, which recently held in Belém, Brazil, the global goal on adaptation came up with a set of indicators how best we can address adaptation, which also include the measurements on different sectors. So these indicate the evolving area in the adaptation science help us to move much more faster in addressing these things, unless like mitigation, because mitigation, at least 5-10 years before itself, we know how to measure carbon dioxide. Now today, only last 3 to 4 years, we started thinking about how to measure adaptation. And these indicators are now coming up, help us to understand how we can measure adaptation. And third, as I mentioned, the private sector preferences. Usually the private sector prefer mitigation so that it helps us them to predict a tangible cash flow. End of the day, the point is to make money for them. And also importantly, the political stability. That is very important. At least in the case of adaptation, this is very important because the solar farms, the drainage system, these are not politically visible, These are more of a country planning or the planning level. The mitigation is talked at the global level, carbon emission. Do the drainage system talked about it, the flooding? No. Today we are talking. Now it is the importance of adaptation make us to talk these things in the global negotiation. Earlier, it was only mitigation. It is only the industry emitting carbon. And nobody talked about solid waste management. Nobody give much attention to a drainage flooding system in the global negotiation. But today, the prime ministers and the presidents and the head of the states, they understood the value of a drainage system. What will happen if there is a flood in a city? Because at the end of the day, they need to answer to the people. So now they understood the importance. So maybe political visibility could be one of the reasons for this imbalance. And also, like all the countries now gearing up towards adaptation because the capacity building is quietly increasing. The point I'm trying to emphasize is the knowledge, the awareness, the capacity building. Compared to mitigation, adaptation is now only booming up. I'm so glad today Green Transition Show took its first pitch in the name of climate adaptation, and I see this is our success. Our first topic, you've given a priority to adaptation, and now we are gaining momentum. Adaptation is gaining momentum, and that is the awareness, and that is the need, and that is the capacity building that we are talking about. And thank you so much to you and your team for giving importance. And that's, we are the advocate of adaptations. That is our job. And we are so happy you're coming up with this topic in Green Transition Show. That is beautiful. And we are trying to scale up at a different level, from the community to academia, to a research, to a policy planner, to a decision maker, or even to a supreme level of any country. So these imbalances help mitigation to move forward much more easier than adaptation. But adaptation is no way behind. We are running the race much more faster, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. We are so happy to have you on the show, and you are our first guest, and that shows how we prioritize climate change issues, particularly climate adaptation. So, what are your final words? We've been having insightful discussions for the past minutes, almost an hour now. What are your final words for us?
Definitely. Adaptation is not new. If you take Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, even in his book, The Origin of Species, he have made a quote where he talks about no living thing can survive if it does not having any ability to adjust. The organism that has the potential or ability to adjust only can survive. That is the survival theory. And that is what today IPCC and climate adaptation professionals like me are advocating for adaptation. Adaptation is nothing but ability to adjust, and it is not something new. It is there with us, but we need to enhance it. If mitigation is about securing the future climate, whereas adaptation is about protecting people today. Both are equally important. There is no different weightage for these two. Both are equally important, but adaptation is fundamentally about resilience, justice, and survival.
If this discussion helps you understand climate adaptation in a deeper way, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. We bring you evidence-based conversations with global experts shaping climate, energy, and sustainable policy. We thank our guests for joining us and sharing such valuable insights. And thank you all for tuning in and engaging with these important issues. We look forward to seeing you in our next episode next week. Until then, goodbye for now.